Taking a look at Montreal this Sunday morning and an update on a story we've been following for the past couple of days. A boil water advisory has now come to an end after a water main break in the city. 150,000 homes were asked to boil water as a preventative measure, but now officials are advising that tap water can be consumed after running cold water taps for just a few minutes before use. Meanwhile, repairs are expected to take weeks as that cleanup continues. For a closer look at this and other infrastructure incidents this summer, I'm now joined by John Gamble. He is the president and CEO of the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies, and we reached him today in Ottawa. Good morning, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today, John.
Good morning, Marianne, and thank you for having me.
And over the past couple of months, we've been talking about the impacts of aging infrastructure. We saw the water main breaks in Calgary that led to people told to restrict their water use for weeks. Now we're talking about this water main break in Montreal. So are these isolated incidents, or is there something more at play here across the country that gives us a sense of what's happening with the infrastructure across Canada?
Well, Marianne, unfortunately, we don't talk about infrastructure enough. And when we do, it's usually under circumstances like these. And infrastructure touches every aspect of our lives. It is the backbone of our economic, our social and cultural, and our environmental quality of life. And it needs that kind of attention so that we can get ahead of these issues. We have great infrastructure in this country, but we're not keeping up, and it is aging.
A lot of them, when these water mains break, we hear from city officials saying, this was supposed to last 100 years, 150 years. So what are the factors contributing to these recent water main breaks, and what can be done to make sure that these types of infrastructure underground and beyond are properly being maintained?
Well, obviously, I'm not going to speak to the specifics of specific causes of Montreal and Calgary. I just simply don't know, and there's going to be a very thorough investigation, and I'm sure that all the authorities are going to make the appropriate decisions coming out of this. But it really does illustrate the point that we don't think about our infrastructure until it's not there for us, or not simply not being there for us. There's actually an adverse consequence where people's properties, their homes are severely damaged, people's livelihoods are impaired, and it's always much more challenging to deal with these things after the fact than getting in front of it. And we need to pivot from seeing infrastructure as an expense to be minimized, but as an investment to be leveraged. It actually gives us economic opportunity. It creates better community and social spaces for us to exist. It makes our communities safer. It makes our communities more environmental friendly. And even beyond the city borders, it allows us to have effective trade mechanisms. It allows us to connect with other communities. It allows us to develop markets. There's so many bottom lines to it, and yet we don't treat it with the urgency and, frankly, the respect it should be dealt with.
So if we don't see the proper investments or a boost in investment when it comes to maintaining the infrastructure, making sure that everything's A-OK, particularly when it comes to water main breaks, for instance, do you anticipate more situations like this happening over the next few years?
No question, and not just water main breaks. I mean, how many, after Fiona, how long were so many people in Atlantic Canada without power? Even here in Ottawa, when we have storms come through. I mean, this is the nation's capital. We have people without power for prolonged periods. Well, if we want to electrify vehicles, and we want to invest in charging stations, we need a more robust transmission grid. We need energy generation. There's a whole myriad of issues, and we need to get ahead of it. And in terms of municipal infrastructure, we've seen a real push by municipalities, and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the federal government have certainly invested in asset management planning, which is incredibly important, a very good use of taxpayers' money. But we also need a more comprehensive and strategic view. The good news is that back in 2021, the federal government did propose a national infrastructure assessment, an opportunity to get a handle on the current state of our infrastructure, not just within our communities, but how our communities are interconnected. And then trying to establish a vision 30 years out from now, 40 years out from now, and then try and put together a little bit of a roadmap. Hopefully that will lead to evidence-based policymaking. It'll help inform the infrastructure programs we need in the future, and it'll give us a little bit of a cohesive vision. Call me a dreamer, but I like to believe that evidence-based policy is good policy, and good policy is good government, and good government is frankly good politics.
And it seems these conversations come up as these things happen. For instance, even in Toronto, we saw that flooding a few weeks ago, including on a major artery, the Don Valley Parkway, brought cars to a standstill. So really quickly, do you think more cooperation across all levels of government will make a difference?
Absolutely. I mean, we all have our hands. Right now, municipalities generally own most of the infrastructure in the country, but they're also the smallest tax base. And that's a huge burden to put on them. Back in 1867, there were not transit systems. There were not these massive water treatment plants. There was no electricity grid in the sense there is now. So we need to have adult discussions. I know FCM has talked about a municipal funding formula. Again, a terrific idea. But we need programs that are consistent and predictable. For example, usually, and I've been saying this to governments for many, many years, over decades, multiple governments and multiple persuasions, you've got to start thinking about the next programs before the current program ends. And that's where a strategic long-term vision comes in. We're all in this together. There's a multiple bottom line. And in fact, if you go back to the recession, the Conference Board of Canada, when they were sort of doing their post-mortem on the stimulus investments, they actually determined that infrastructure was the most effective form of stimulus. So it's not just about water mains, it's about, let's not think about stopping the wheels from coming off. Let's talk about harnessing Canada's potential and creating economic opportunity for Canadians. Let's talk about better communities, better cultural and social spaces, a cleaner environment, carbon resistance. We're fighting a back action. We need to get ahead of this.
All right. Thank you so much for this, for your time and for your insight. John Gamble, President and CEO of the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies.
Thank you.